Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to the Post Up with David Grubb right here on Boot Crew Media on this Labor Day. I, of course, am your host, David Grubb. Glad you could join me. Since you're taking the day off from work, I decided, hey, well, why not give you something to watch while you're hanging out or having a barbecue or whatever it is you're doing on this Labor Day. Before we get going, let me just say, on this Labor Day, let's try to remember the people that made it possible, the unions that worked really hard and the labor leaders who made it possible for things like a weekend and, protections for workers to happen. So don't just think of it as a day off from work. Remember those who fought so hard to make sure that we had an opportunity to have these kinds of days off and to, have the protections at work that we do have while we still have them. All right. Just getting into the show today, the big thing this weekend, and the Pelicans made a post about this, was Willie Green's comments that he had made to WDSU over a week ago, but they kind of got highlighted this week because I think you've heard this talk all off season about the Pelicans potentially trading a Herb Jones or trading a Trey Murphy, and no matter what, it just feels like those are ludicrous ideas at this stage, given where Joe Dumars is with this team, given the level of production that those guys have had in their careers with New Orleans and their value to the Pelicans, and ultimately that they are homegrown talents who have the potential to be forces in this league for years to come. And one of the things that they talked about, again, in Willie Green's statement, and this is his quote, they mean a ton to your point. He's talking to Fletcher Mackel, and he's asking about their meaning. They started their careers here. We watched them grow. They're both two dynamic big wings, and that's what the NBA is about. Guys that can step on the floor, that can guard multiple positions, that can rebound, that can make winning plays. And to add to that, and this is really what you start with, they're high character pillars of our organization. So we love Herb and Trey. We're grateful to get them back and get them healthy. So certainly the Pelicans have placed a lot of value in this duo, and it only makes sense. They've played 4 years in New Orleans. They have improved each and every year outside of last year for Herb, and that was primarily due to injury. But both of these guys bring something valuable to the Pelicans. For Trey Murphy, you're getting a high-level scorer who has shown that if given the opportunity to have volume shots on a night-to-night basis, that he can be both effective and efficient. He's shown that he can distribute the basketball off the dribble. He's shown that he can rebound the basketball when placed in the right positions. And he's shown that he's willing to improve as a defender, having gone from really a non-factor defensively, but this is a guy who went to Virginia in particular out of college when he was in college to make sure that he became a solid and effective teammate and defender. And those things are starting to pay off. You saw last year a better defensive effort out of Trey than I think you've seen in years past. Not that he was a poor defender, but I think as experience goes in the NBA, you become a better defender if you are willing. The biggest thing about defense in the NBA is you have to be willing to do it. That's what it's about. It's defense and rebounding are more than anything about effort and paying attention to what's going on around you. You can practice as much as you want, but in the moment, plays don't go as you rehearse them in practice. The defense isn't always going to be exactly the same as you rehearsed it. And so, those are players who have the ability to adjust to the player that they're guarding, who understand their personnel. As you've heard plenty of times, KYP, know your personnel. The players who can do those things are extremely valuable. And I think that both of these guys, when they came into the league, you could see that they had value from day one, and they have continued to prove that. And we're going to get into the statistics of this in just a moment and show you how valuable the two of them have been over the last few years. But first, I just want to make sure, again, that for those other teams around the league who continue to believe that you can get Trey Murphy, particularly the Golden State Warriors have been mentioned more than anyone else. I think if you're trying to get Trey Murphy, I think that today is not the day. And depending on how the Pelicans do, I think that the Pelicans have decided that Trey and Herb are two of the cornerstones that they want to keep no matter what. Zion Williamson may be the biggest variable here, because if Zion doesn't work out this year, if he's injured or if he doesn't perform to the level that the Pelicans expect, then certainly you would imagine that Zion will be on the trade block at the end of this year. It just doesn't make sense for either side to continue that. But if you are a Pelicans team that decides to move away from Zion Williamson and you transition into a new era, you still have to provide really good teammates for Jeremiah Fears and Derek Queen. And I don't think you could find better teammates than Trey Murphy and Herb Jones. if you're going to win, you don't tear down all the studs if you want to rebuild this team. You can tear down some of the things that aren't effective for you. You can tear down players who are not necessarily living up to their contract value. But I don't think there's a Pelicans fan who would say that Trey Murphy and Herb Jones aren't living up to the value of their contracts at this stage, that they have proven over these past 4 years that they are players that are ascendant and that they're players that you can, when they're on the court, are going to contribute in positive ways. And I just wanted to get into that as we start talking about how good they are as teammates. I want to go back last year. The two of them, the trio of Zion, Herb, and Trey played no games together. So that kind of impacted these numbers slightly, but not really. Because when you look at these, what you're going to find is it pretty much tracks. I'm going to show you since 22-23, the players who most often appear in the Pelicans' most effective lineups. So we're going to do the 5-man, 4-man, 3-man, and 2-man lineups since 2022-23. And then I'm going to show you the total of all these. And what we're going to show you is how many times in each of those scenarios, each player appears in the top 5 performing lineups of that group. All of them are based on the same amount of minimum minutes for that group. So for each one, I took the top 20 units in minutes for each one of those groups, 5, 4, 3, and 2-man team units, and took the top 5 performers as far as net rating goes in each of those groups. Okay, so there you have the total of 20 teams, right? And on those 20 teams, you have 5 spots each. So, not 5 spots each, but on those 20 teams, you have a number of spots. So these are going to show you the totals. The one for 24-25, I'll explain because it has a different notation than the others. But let's start here. Okay, New Orleans finest. These are the best players from 2022-23. And what you'll notice here is that your starters are around the same numbers typically. Okay, your starters are going to fall in the same number typically, particularly in the 5-man groups. It's pretty much balanced what you see in 22-23. This is the team that went 42-40 for the Pelicans, the team that Zion Williamson, got to about January and then got hurt, and the team finished 42-40, closed strong, made it into the play-in, lost to the Oklahoma City Thunder. What you see in that 5-man group is, pretty even distribution of a team. In their 5-man group, everybody, Brandon, CJ, Herb, Trey, Larry Nance, Devontae, all 2 appearances in the top 5 teams of that group. Now in the 4-man is where you start. And as you go forward from 4-man, 3-man, and 2-man, what you'll start to notice is that the teammates, not your 2 stars, are the ones that start to show up much more often. And who shows up the most? Okay, so when you get to the 4-man group, and again, I think this also illustrates how valuable CJ McCollum is. And when we talk about Jordan Poole going forward, you need to see this kind of similar distribution for him as the 3rd scorer on this team. So when you look at CJ McCollum's numbers and you go to that final column of how many times he appears, 12 to lead all Pelicans players that year. A lot of that is due to dependability, certainly, and that CJ consistently played most of the games of the course of the season, more than any other player in the starting rotation typically. But you see he and Herb right there at 12. Trey, who was not a full-time, not getting full-time minutes that year, kind of coming into his own in his 2nd year, still right there at 8. Larry Nance Jr., and again, another player who I think the Pelicans have struggled to replace with that athleticism, defensive ability on the front line. And that's where a lot of his value was. But it also was Larry Nance gave the Pelicans a lot of high value as far as his offensive production because of his ability to score in transition and not miss shots. So when you look at this group, in the 5-man groups, the minimum is 28 minutes. The 4-man groups that year, the minimums were 140 minutes. For the 3-man groups, nobody played fewer than 327 minutes together. And for the 2-man groups, nobody played fewer than 600 minutes together. So you have all of those groups together. And again, what you see on that final line, particularly in the 4 and the 3-man groups, those are the ones that are the ones you really should pay attention to. CJ McCollum, 8. Herb Jones, 8. Trey Murphy, 5. Larry Nance, 6. So in those 4-man and 3-man groups, because you're appearing in a number of different lineups over the course of a season, you're looking for who's appearing the most. And what are you seeing? Your role players are showing up for you. Your stars didn't play as much. Brandon played more games than Zion that year. So Zion only shows up in a couple of lineups. Brandon shows up in 7. But Trey, with more than Brandon, shows you that he had a really good impact as a teammate. And that's what you want to see in your secondary players. You go to the 23-24 season. Very similar, right? Except now you're starting to see the ascension of Trey Murphy, who was getting starter minutes late in that season for the Pelicans. So when you look at Zion Williamson again and Brandon Ingram, very similar scores. This is the 49-win team. So you have Zion and Brandon, about the same. CJ, another starter, about the same. CJ played more games than both Brandon and Zion. So look, there's CJ with a slight edge for them. But when you talk about Herb Jones and Trey Murphy right there, Herb with 14 spots, pretty much evenly distributed amongst it. But then you see Trey, and you look at his distribution. 4 out of 5 5-man teams during the 49-win season. 5 out of 5 4-man teams. 4 out of 5 3-man teams. 4 out of 5 2-man teams. Trey Murphy's right there. Trey Murphy's right there. And then when you come into the 24-25 season last year, in all the abysmal parts of last year, what you're going to see the number in parentheses there that represents the number of positive, how many of the positive lineups the Pelicans had. And the Pelicans didn't have many positive lineups last season. They had 0 2-man positive lineups. For the 3-man lineups, for last season, for the 3-man lineups, you only had, I believe, 2 positive lineups. For the 4-man, you only had 4-man was 3, and for the 5-man, you only had 3. Okay, so you only had 3 positive lineups in that. So when you look at the 5-man lineups, Zion well represented in a very short amount of time. CJ McCollum well represented again, because again, he played the lion's share of minutes last season. Brandon got one of the 5 in the early going. And the most positive in that 5-man group, only CJ and Zion with multiple played on multiple positive lineups in that 5-man group. Again, you see Trey Murphy show up, Yves Missi as well. And you look at the starters again to the end. Zion with 8 as a starter, Yves with 7 as a starter, Zion with 4 total positive lineups, CJ with 5 total positive lineups. But here you go again. Herb Jones didn't play a lot of games, but still right there with 2 positive lineups. And Trey Murphy 11 with 4 positive lineups, tied for second with Zion and with Zion Williamson. So I think what you see here is we go into the totals over these past 3 years. Who have been your 3 most valuable players as far as appearing as great teammates? Trey Murphy's been the best teammate. And I think Herb Jones would probably be number 1 if Herb had played more games last season, because Herb typically shows up again, and I've said this before, he shows up as number 1 or number 2 every season for the Pelicans and on-off, as far as his impact on the court and the fall off for the Pelicans when he's not playing. So I think if Herb had played last season a full game, he'd be ahead of both CJ and Trey. But what you see right there is your reserves have shown up. I mean, not your reserves, your other starters have shown up for you over the course of these 3 seasons for the Pelicans. It hasn't been on them. It's these 2 guys right here, Zion and Brandon, half of what these guys are. Less than half of what these guys were, because of the games missed, and because, again, for the stars, you're going to see your biggest impact in your 5-man groups with a star. As you start switching up, the stars are not playing with a whole bunch of different lineups. They play with similar lineups, on a night-to-night basis. So you're going to see a distribution of less impact. Your other 3 guys are going to play with more players because they're going to play sometimes with these 2. They're going to play sometimes with a mix of the bench guys. So their impact has to be consistent across player groups. Okay, so when you look at this, who's the most consistent? CJ McCollum was incredibly consistent. And this is now going to be Jordan Poole's role. CJ was as impactful as anybody else on this lineup on a night-to-night basis because of his consistency. Maybe not the kind of high-level production that the Pelicans were seeking at times or fans put on him, but again, he was never supposed to be the lead guy. But what he did do was show up every night, and that's the same thing for Herb Jones, and that's the same thing for Trey Murphy. They do not take plays off the table for you, and that's what you want out of your other guys. And if Trey can move up into this high-level role, then you really have something. If his distribution at the 5-man lineup starts to go up, then I think what you're going to see is some real growth for Trey. think I messed up some of these numbers. I didn't replace all of them. I'm sorry for that, but the end totals are correct. After CJ, I think I sent in an old version of this, but the end numbers are correct. So I'm sorry for that. I apologize. But as you see, and that's why this section is called Lifting All Boats, is because no matter who they're playing with, Trey and Herb make the players around them better. And that's all you can ask for, is that on a nightly basis, they are doing their job and their teammates can count on them. And they make no matter who is alongside them, whether it's Jordan Hawkins, whether it's Yves Missi, whether it's DeJounte Murray. And DeJounte Murray only showed up in one lineup last season. And it just really showed his struggles, that he did not match well with pretty much any group. He was lower in there. Zion's numbers last year and Zion's numbers every year, one of the things that you kind of see is he doesn't always finish in the top 5, but once you get below that in those groups of 20, he shows up a lot. So his high level production is probably limited because of the minutes and that he's played over the last few seasons. But what you see is more and more players do well with Zion, and that makes sense because he's the most impactful offensive player on the team. And the other thing you notice when Zion plays with Trey and Herb, and you can look deeper into this on the NBA stats, is that when you look at those 3 guys, the free throw rate when Zion, Trey, and Herb is on the floor is as high as it's going to be for any 3-man group. They're constantly at the top when they're on there because you're opening up the paint. And one of the things that you also see in the 5-man lineups with Zion is that when people talk about you have to put around shooters around Zion, the best 5-man lineups with Zion have included Jonas Valanciunas and Jose Alvarado with Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion. What do you learn from that? Is that the most important thing for Zion Williamson is not having a spacing center. It's not necessarily having a great point guard, though both of those things would make his life easier in some ways. The most important thing is that he's looking for teammates that are going to run with him. Jose's going to push the tempo. Trey's going to push the tempo. You need a guy who can close out defensive possessions because you can't run without the basketball. Jonas was great on the defensive glass and getting the ball out off the rebound and getting it to the ball handlers because he wasn't going to run. So he got the ball out quickly to outlet and allowed the Pelicans to run in transition. So you have to have that. The fastest pace the Pelicans have played with in the last 4 years with Willie Green, as we go on to offensive production now and talk about this, the fastest lineup that Willie Green's had in the last 4 years, last year's was the fastest, but the one right behind it, and last year was fast with a lot of mistakes and inefficiency. Last year's was the fastest. The one right behind that is the previous year with Jonas playing the predominant of those lineups that were really quick and with Zion Williamson. So you got speed. The thing with the center position with Zion is always going to be defensive more so than offensive. It's not about your center shooting threes. It's can they finish defensive possessions? Can they run the floor? Can they rebound? And can they block shots and be a presence? Jonas was going to give you consistent offensive production on the low post, but a lot of those were second chance opportunities on the offensive glass and just being efficient. So it wasn't him spreading the floor a lot. It wasn't him. He could take the 3, but you weren't looking for 3 shots from beyond the arc from Jonas every night. Know your job, and you can play with Zion Williamson. You create space, not just with standing in certain places, but with movement. And Jonas was smart enough to know how to screen, know how to move away into a short post, to move into the 15-foot area to catch, to shoot a jumper, to be in the dunker spot. All those things, Jonas understood those with experience. And so maybe with a Kevon Looney who understands those things as well, you can get some good production from him because he's going to rebound the basketball well in the defensive end. That's one of his strong suits. He's going to get rid of the basketball. He understands tempo with the Golden State Warriors. So when you look at that, you can play traditional centers with Zion Williamson. For your point guard, tempo and accuracy are the 2 most important things. When Jose has worked well with Zion Williamson, it's because he pushes the floor really well, and because Jose, when he's in those modes of knocking down jumpers in the catch and shoot, not creating for himself, but being available in the catch and shoot. You start the possessions early with tempo, get into the offense quickly. You let Zion do his thing. You kick it out for open shots. Movement, knowing what you're supposed to do, moving the basketball and the player quickly. Those are the things that work well for Zion Williamson. Now, when you look around the league, and the profile of the best offensive teams. And again, comparing what the Pelicans need to do next season, I think the path for them certainly is to become the path for them to be better quicker is to become a great offensive team, because they're not going to be a great defensive team. They don't have a great collection of defenders. They can be an adequate defensive team. And how important is it to be an adequate defensive team? If you're in the top 15 defensively, 13 of those 15 teams that had winning records last year, 13 of the 50, there were 15 teams out of 30 in the NBA. 13 out of 15 were in the top 13 of the top 15, 13 out of those 15, excuse me, I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words today. 13 of those top 15 were top 15 defenses. The other two were at 21. So the lowest was 21 defensively. And there were a couple at 12 out of 15. And then there were a couple right below 15, like it's 16 and 18. So when you take those teams into consideration, you see you want to be a good defense. But when you get to defense, when you get to offense, both in points, 7 out of the top 10 teams in points were above 45 wins. 9 out of the top 10 teams in offense made the playoffs or had winning records. The only team that didn't was the Sacramento Kings in offensive rating. So, and then when you take the top 5, how important is the offense and how much of a drop off? When you look at the top 5 teams in the league last year that in offensive rating, they averaged 57 wins. 57 wins among the top 5 offensive teams. That's their average. Okay. When you go from 6 to 10, it's a 10-game drop-off down to 47 wins. That's how big the difference is from being a top 5 offense to being a 6 through 10 offense. It drops down to 47 wins. And then you drop below that and it starts dropping precipitously. 14 of the top 15 offenses in offensive rating finished above 500. The next one, the only team out of the top 15, the only team is Orlando. And Orlando had a top 3 defense. So unless the Pelicans are going to be elite defensively and still have the kind of individual scoring production, which I think that they do, if you want to talk individual scorers, you'd say Zion Williamson and Trey Murphy is equal to or in the vicinity of, depending on your point of view, of Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. Right? You say they're in the vicinity or they're better than one of those two. So, but the Pelicans are not the kind of defensive squad, have not shown the commitment on that end. Maybe they'll be better this year, but I don't see them being a top 5 defense this season. So the goal for the Pelicans has to be to create defense, create offense. Pace is not as important for the Pelicans, though it is good to be a fast team. There are plenty of teams. The Pelicans offense best pace numbers around, I think 99.7 is the best that they've had in the Willie Green era. And that was last year. If you finish at 99.7 in pace, that puts you, the Pelicans were right in the middle of the league in pace. That was as fast as they've been in the Willie Green era, but we're not really a good offensive team. As you saw, they were in the bottom 3 in offensive rating, not great in offensive points scored, not great in shooting. But if they're going to be more efficient if Zion Williamson is on the floor, they're going to be more efficient if Trey Murphy plays more than 50 games. They're going to be more efficient if Herb Jones is on the court more. They're going to be more efficient if Jordan Poole plays like he did last season. They're going to be more efficient if Yves Missi takes a step forward. So, all of those things are possible for the Pelicans going forward. And I think that that's the focus this year for this team. And it's why they've got to lean on James Borrego. The Pelicans have to follow that philosophy this year, and Willie Green needs to step back in his control of the offense and allow it to be what it's going to be, because that is what's going to save this team this season. If they want to be a contender, they have to run on offense. They have to get in transition. They have to close the possessions defensively. And that was the key for them during the 49-win season when all the breaks went their way. Remember, they were a 21-win team at home. 21. But they won on the road because the offense was better on the road than it was at home. The Pelicans were able to run on the road. They were able to close teams out, and they were able to force teams, whether you say able or fortunate enough, that teams didn't make a lot of open threes. But if you're depending on that, on teams not making threes in the league, I think that's a concern. So what do you have to do? You've got to continue to put the pressure on offensively. And there were only a few teams last year that were able to do all 3 well. Cleveland, Boston, Oklahoma City. They're the only teams that appear on all three of those lists. Points per game, best offensive rating, best defensive rating. Those are the only three teams that appear on all 10. But generally, most of the other teams that made the playoffs, we're talking about 15 teams with winning records in the league. Some teams lower than that obviously made the playoffs. But 15 out of the 20 teams that qualify for the postseason, whether it's the play-in or the playoffs, 15 of those teams, they've finished in at least two of those categories. So that's where the Pelicans have to be. They've got to be a top 10, a top 15 team in all levels, but really you want to shoot for that top 10. Top 10 offensively in particular for the Pelicans. If they can become a top 10 offense, then you can guarantee pretty much that they're going to be in the playoffs or at least the play-in. If they can get to a top 10 offense, and I think that has to be the goal during training camp. That has to be the goal every day. Defense is important, and I am fully aware. And it's for me, to emphasize offense first is a bit of a change. But the numbers don't lie, and the stats don't lie, and the makeup of this team doesn't lie. What are they going to be best suited at? It's going to be running up and down the court, and that's where they need to focus their attention on creating an offense that does that. Jose Alvarado, just in case you haven't heard, he did post an update for his injury situation. Jose was playing for Puerto Rico in international competition. He got carted off the court while he was laid out on a stretcher after he took a hard foul. He was going up to grab a rebound. He landed on his tailbone, it seemed. But Jose posted on Instagram and said, "Appreciate the love, y'all, but your boy is good. We'll see how he heals up, but there's plenty of time, obviously, before training camp begins. If it's just a tailbone bruise, he should be fine by then." Jose missed 26 games last season, mostly with this hamstring injury. He did put up a career best 10.3 points, averaged almost 5 rebounds, 2 boards, and more than 1 steal per game in about 24 minutes a night. This is the first year of his two-year, $4 million extension, and he does have a $4.5 million player option in 2026-27. So you'd imagine that Jose, if he exercised that option, and he likely will if he's still with the Pelicans, or no matter where he is, he's got a team option, he's going to take it. But again, I think that his contract makes him very appealing for other teams, though I don't think he's going anywhere at the beginning of the season. I think if Jose Alvarado does end up getting traded, it's because the Pelicans either A, aren't doing well, or Jeremiah Fears turns into a quality point guard faster than the Pelicans expect. But that's the situation. All right, that's going to do it for today. I hope y'all enjoy your Labor Day. Again, get out there and remember what the day is about and have a good time as well. You know how to follow me on social media at DM Grub on Twitter, Instagram. You can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Until the next time, this has been The Post Up with David Grubb. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and all of that. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Have a great one.